I like to dispel myths. So 2 myths that have become conventional wisdom. The first, beware Greeks bearing gifts, right. Well, you know where that started, was the Trojan horse, right? Well, I have no Trojan horse today, but I do have a Chick-fil-A cow that we've provided for each one of you. And if you don't know anything about the Chick-fil-A cow, this is our famous now advertising campaign where cows are into self-preservation and they don't want you to eat beef, they want you to eat more chicken. Exactly. So interestingly enough, this cow has its hoof prints on Madison Avenue now. So just like they have stars in Hollywood, advertising campaigns have their stars on Madison Avenue. So there are hoof prints on Madison Avenue. I just wanted you guys to have a gift from me, not a Trojan horse, but a Chick-fil-A cow. Second myth. The second myth is there's no free lunch. Well, also not true, because you did get a card for a free Chick-fil-A. If you don't have one or have misplaced it, or if you got a spouse that when you go home will be really upset, I've got plenty more for you, so I'll give you another card when we get done. So I bring gifts to you guys and a free lunch for you. So I am honored to be here and excited. This is not going to be a presentation. I want to make this an interactive working exercise. And so I'm going to actually put you guys to work in groups some during the course of this, a chance for interaction. And also, I'm going to do a little bit of a case study. You might not be surprised, the case study actually is Chick-fil-A. And then on the backside, we're going to have Q&A as a group to discuss what we've talked about and have any comments you want to make or questions you want to ask, not just about Chick-fil-A, but some of the leadership principles that we're going to talk about. So as we do this, I want to make sure you know exactly where we're going, what our objective is. I want to talk about a vitally important principle, and it's how to grow as a leader and how to grow other leaders. How to grow as a leader and how to grow other leaders, because I think this is fundamental for any business, nonprofit, ministry. I actually think it's critical in a family as well. But this issue I think is vitally important for impact, is how to grow as a leader and how to grow other leaders. Now, I need to take a second and tell you a little bit about the context about me and my perspective is what I'm going to share with you about. And it's got 2 big influences. The first is actually growing up as an active Orthodox Christian. I was one of those that was fortunate to grow up in an Orthodox family that was focused on Orthodox Christianity, not necessarily putting ethnicity first, not necessarily putting secular achievement first, but I grew up in a family with 2 parents totally committed to their faith. And so my dad was a pharmacist. My mom stayed at home with us as kids. They were in the 60s and 70s kind of pioneers in adult education. They were pioneers in stewardship. In fact, some of you guys know Bill Marianis that's got a big stewardship ministry. Bill was mentored by a fellow named Dr. Larry Guess, and Dr. Larry Guess was mentored by my parents in stewardship. So I grew up in a house that was focused on faith. Father Steve Dalber was one of my mom's Bible study attendees. We've just been very blessed in our family to have my folks as a role model. My dad just died at 99, just a little over a year ago. My mom just celebrated her 97th birthday. So we don't tell her the Greek tradition is we hope you live to 100. That doesn't come off well because they're like that close, you know? So anyway. What I share with you today is really impacted by faith that was lived out in my family. The second thing was really been impacted by Chick-fil-A. As Charles mentioned, I started as a 17-year-old high school restaurant team member. The story's interesting. I told John Mark and a couple other folks last night about this. When I was a senior in high school, I was cutting grass and cleaning gutters. And I was like, I needed a little bit better part-time job. So I went to the local family-owned department store in Atlanta, Rich's Department Store. My mom had actually worked there years ago. I applied for the part-time job. The lady was incredibly apathetic, and she gave me the application back and said, "We'll call you." So I'm like, So I start walking down the mall to eat lunch at my favorite place, Chick-fil-A, exactly. And I'm walking up to the counter, and this is true. I'm walking up to the counter, and I'm thinking, what happens if I don't get that job at Rich's? I need a backup application in somewhere. So I walk up to Chick-fil-A to order my Chick-fil-A sandwich, and I see a sign that says, "Applications for employment accepted now." I'm like, you know what? I think I need one of those. And so I got an application, met the Chick-fil-A operator that was taking over that restaurant from an existing operator that was moving to a new store. That operator was so enthusiastic. At the end of that interview, right then, I said, "Can I come work for you?" And I'm grateful he said yes, because this is my 40-year backup gig. And so it's just been an incredible blessing to be part of Chick-fil-A. So the reason I tell you that is what I'm going to share with you is from my perspective, from an Orthodox perspective and from a Chick-fil-A perspective, a business based on biblical principles we'll talk about in a minute. But my encouragement is filter what I'm saying through your context, through your ministry, through your not-for-profit, through your business, whatever your situation is. Think about how do we reflect on the principles I'm going to share, but apply them in your context. Because your context is not the same as mine, but find those common principles and practices, and I hope it'll be helpful to you. All right, so again, I said this is going to be interactive. This is how we're going to start. You got in front of you an outline, and I want to hit 10 leadership challenges lightning fast. And try to grab what these core leadership challenges are, because in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to do some work on these as they apply to you and what you're doing. So the first leadership challenge, I'm guessing some of us feel this: information overload. Information overload. Who has too many emails in your email box right now? Okay, don't go check it right now, but information overload. One leadership challenge. Second leadership challenge, the time squeeze. The time squeeze. I think we all know this. The number one shortage that we have in America today from a physical standpoint is a shortage of sleep. Why? Because we squeeze as much as we can into those few hours of the day. Third challenge, the comparison trap. The comparison trap. When we compare, in fact, some have said comparison really is the enemy of joy. The comparison trap. How am I doing compared to somebody else versus how am I doing compared to what God's called me to do? The comparison trap. The fourth one, this is very true in especially churches, closely held businesses. It's, I thought we were friends. I thought we were friends. You've got a leadership responsibility. You're challenging someone else. You're giving them feedback. Maybe even you've got to give somebody a new assignment, or maybe somebody needs to be off the team, and the response is, I thought we were friends. Fifth, it's not wrong as long as you don't get caught. It's a totally different view of ethics. It's not wrong as long as you don't get caught. It's a totally different view of ethics and values. Six, the confidence gap. The confidence gap. It's that gap inside you of, do I have what it takes to do this? Do you get stopped by that? Or do you have the faith to pursue that leadership call that you've got? Seventh, the siren call of success. The siren call of success. This is where our culture puts more emphasis on achievement than contribution. That they put more of an emphasis on achievement versus contribution. It's a challenge for leaders because you can get distracted by that. Number 8, should I stay or should I go? When you want to invest your leadership, but you're not sure you're in the right place, that can be a challenge to your leadership. Should I stay or should I go? 9, these are those personal habits, your own worst enemy. Is there a personal habit or a discipline or a lack of competency that gets in your way because you just can't get over that constraint that's holding you back in your leadership? And then number 10, you can have it all, or can you? Can you actually be active in your faith? Can you be successful professionally? Can you make a difference in the community? Can you have a family that works? Can you have it all? Maybe not. All right, so stay with me on these 10. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the next 3 minutes, and I want you to work with 3 or 4 people around you, and collectively, I want you to come up with your shared top 3. So work with 3 or 4 people around you, and somebody be the one to jot down the final, but what are your shared top 3? In other words, come together in consensus. Which of these 3 are most common in your group of 3 or 4? Everybody got the assignment? Yeah, your own leadership. Yeah. So which one really challenges you the most? Which 3 of these challenge you the most among your group of 3 or 4? Ready, set, go. All right, so we're going to actually ask about 3 or 4 groups to share real quick. So you got anybody else got the mics? Let's get this table right here to share. Who's our spokesperson and what are the 3? Tell us your name for everybody to know who's talking.
I'm Stacy. Our three were the time squeeze. Should I? I'm with IOCC. The time squeeze, so number 2. Number 8, should I stay or should I go? And then number 9, my own worst enemy.
Awesome. Are you telling Dean, should you stay or should you go? Is that...
I said, we're in a safe space, right?
That's great. All right, we got a mic. Go Steve and Missy over here. What did you guys come up with? Okay. Brandon's the spokesperson. All right, go Brandon.
All right, Brandon Baca from Oklahoma City. Ours was the time squeeze, the siren call of success, and my own worst enemy.
Okay. Let's go back here to that back table.
I'm Michelle Mujayas from Los Angeles, and we have the time squeeze, the confidence gap, and my own worst enemy.
Very good. All right, one more. Let's go back over here to this table. This is the workout routine. Sorry. Go back and forth.
Hello, Tatiana Hoff, New York City. Information overload, time squeeze, my own worst enemy.
Interesting. So why go through this exercise and get down to these top 3? What's the point? Somebody, why talk about this? Focus. Okay, good, focus. What else? Common themes. Common themes, absolutely. These are common challenges where we have to say, how do we respond to them? In fact, this gives us a chance to think about how does this impact our leadership this session and then other sessions to follow. Because here's the deal. Why go through this? Because these challenges are real. And they're real challenges for our leadership. God's called us to lead. He's called us to have impact. He's called us to be stewards of all the gifts that are given to us. But these challenges get in the way. And if we can't cope with these challenges, it'll limit our effectiveness as a leader. So it's important to call this out so we think about what skills do we put in place to deal with that. So that's a setup for these 3 big questions. That if we want to have impact as a leader, we want to grow as a leader, we want to build those leadership skills, it really comes back, we got to start with this definition, what is leadership? That's a core question. What is leadership? Then you get into these 2 that we said are the objectives, which is how do I grow as a leader? And then thirdly, how do I increase my leadership impact? Or how do I grow other leaders to have more impact? So that's where we're headed. And again, we'll use the Chick-fil-A case study in just a few minutes. But to start this question of what is leadership, I want you to do another exercise. But I want this one to start really personal. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about that person in your life that even perhaps if you said, no, I don't know if I agree with this or not, that person looked at you and said, Dimitri Katos, you're a leader. Who is that person that looked at you and said, Dean, you can do this? Who's that person you have so much R-E-S-P-E-C-T? I'll wait for somebody to do Aretha. Somebody you respect so much because they saw something in you that maybe you didn't see in yourself, and it was the potential to have an impact on others. Everybody with me on this? Think about that person. Who was it? I want you to do this. I want you to take a couple of minutes. I want you to write their name down, and then I want you to put down 3 or 4 actual behavioral things they did to communicate, I believe in you. I have confidence in you. I challenge you. So who is that person? What was their role in your life? And then what did they actually do that brought out that potential in you? Everybody with me on this one? The person who saw it in you and helped bring it out. Take about 3 minutes and see if you can identify that person and the 3 or 4 behaviors they did. All right? Let's go. All right, everybody got those behaviors? Here's what I want you to do next. I want you to turn to one other person, so partner up just 2 people. I want you to share your story with each other. Just take a couple of minutes and I want you to share that leader who impacted you and what they did and receive that from the other person. All right, so just exchange with one other person. All right, we're gonna have a couple of groups share about the leader, the role they played in their life, and the behaviors. So you guys, the 2 of y'all start. Fine.
So my name is Fatty. I'm from Los Angeles, and we both, so she shared her school advisor. I spoke a little bit about my father, and we spoke about the element of basically giving people an opportunity to excel. You know, for me personally, I've always had opinions about a lot of things within family business or whether it's church on the local level. And I've always voiced opinion, but early on I was always shy and reserved to get involved and implement any of my thoughts. And my father was always the one to kind of grab me and essentially throw me in the driver's seat and say, here's an opportunity, show what you can do. And I've always excelled as a result of it. And do you want to elaborate on your? Yeah.
I'm Jessica. I'm from Boston. One of the difficulties, I think, in being a leader and sometimes having new ideas is that because they're new, there may not be a clear path of how to accomplish them. And so the role of having someone encourage you and give you a role to excel is sometimes they, from the outside, can see a path or see at least a branch that may help you get there and may help guide you.
Tell us about your person again. They were your...
It's an advisor, school advisor, who used to advise the organization that I lead at school.
Hi, I'm Eric Peljug, and I guess it was a repeated theme, but I'll just take the last case of it was a professor I worked with during my PhD, Professor Vijay Kumar, who's now the Dean of Engineering at UPenn. And at that time, he wasn't even tenured at the time, but he would treat us as peers. And so it wasn't, we were in the classroom with him. We would go sit in a conference room, we'd open up papers, we'd start reviewing them and tossing around ideas. And I was struck by being treated like a peer to, a lofty professor at the time as a very young graduate student. And he expected us to rise to the level. And so I thought that was really important leadership. And then as I thought about it, I could think of a few other people that did almost the exact same thing at other parts of my education.
That's great.
Sure yours?
Go ahead, Nick.
We, of course, Bill Marianis came up as one of the, he and another gentleman, Don O'Neill, very, it's less so in Bill's case, but very quietly expressed Christian values. Bill, he's quiet to a point, but the very consistent application of Christian values was so inviting. I just was drawn to Don to spend more time with him. And similar to Eric's point, leaders are strangely so generous with their time. They're kind of the first ones to pick you up at the airport. In Bill's case, he's the first one to reply no matter where he is in the world. It's just very interesting to me.
That's great. Thank you guys for sharing. So why do this exercise when we begin to ask this question, what is leadership? We do this because we begin with our own experience. Who has led in a way that's impacted us? And again, encouraged or challenged us to grow as a leader. So as we begin to answer this question, we start with our own frame of reference, our own experience. And I would encourage you to begin to use that person as a beginning point for a model of what does leadership really look like. By the way, a lot of times when I've done this exercise, one of the most common outcomes of this exercise, you know what it is? I haven't talked to that person in a long time and I need to call them or write them or thank them. So follow that warm-hearted impulse and just text them or jot them a note. And if they've passed, pray for their blessed memory. So begin this question of what is leadership from your own experience. But then let's add to that, what do some of the best leadership thinkers say about what is leadership? Warren Bennis wrote a great book on becoming a leader. He says, the ability to translate intention into reality and sustain it is the essence of leadership. Marcus Buckingham, famous consultant and author, he says, leadership means rallying people to a better future. Marcus says, leaders traffic in the future. They move people from here to there. And then John Maxwell, noted pastor and author, says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Okay, so what do I offer you guys? Well, I'm going to offer to you guys the Tassopoulos hypothesis. I like saying that because it rhymes. It's really the Tassopoulos theorem, but here we go. So what is leadership? This is what I believe based on what I've learned from my parents and their Orthodox perspective those that I've read and studied under, but also my time at Chick-fil-A. Leadership is actually more than just influence, because sometimes influence can come from popularity, or influence can come from knowledge, but real leadership, in my mind, is intentional influence. I think it's got to be intentional because it's got to be purposeful, goal-oriented, positive. I think leadership is a calling. And then leadership also has influence. That if you're not making a change, if you're not having an impact on others, if you're not developing at the highest level, developing other leaders, then really, how well are you leading? So leadership, in my view, is intentional influence. And that's what we want to study for the rest of our time today. So intentional influence, I believe, is the fruit of both competence and character. And we see this in the Psalms. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands he led them. Competence and character. Competence and character. Now here's the Chick-fil-A case study. Here's where we're going. So we're going to begin with this idea of, so what is leadership? If I want to grow as a leader, what does it look like? And let me tell you about the case study. So a little bit about Chick-fil-A. So 3 key dates in Chick-fil-A history. The first is 1946. That's when Truett Cathy, you'll read about it in the book, the founder of Chick-fil-A, and I'll tell you a little bit about his personal story in just a minute. But in 1946, he opened his first restaurant called the Dwarf Grill that became the Dwarf House in Atlanta. It was literally called the Dwarf Grill for a very obvious reason. It was tiny. Just a couple of stools and a couple of tables, and it was near the airport in Atlanta that at that point was unimportant, but later became very important to be next to the airport in Atlanta. And from that grill, when he opened in 1946, he built a small business. By the way, that first restaurant in 1946 was closed on Sunday. Not that big a deal in 1946 in the South, but it's now 2017, and now all Chick-fil-A restaurants are still closed on Sunday. Makes a little bit of a difference today. Second date, 1967. Truett invented between 46 and 67 a chicken steak sandwich in that Dwarf Grill, Dwarf House restaurant. It was such a popular item, people said, you need a restaurant just based on Chick-fil-A. So Truett opened in a mall in Atlanta, and it was the first time that fast food had come to a mall setting like this, a Chick-fil-A restaurant that was tiny, but it was incredibly successful. And so Chick-fil-A began to grow in malls, so that in the 70s and early 80s, Chick-fil-A became the dominant player in most malls from a food standpoint. But people said, Truett, you need to be more accessible. So in 1986, we opened the first freestanding restaurant, Chick-fil-A, in Atlanta. And we began to grow from there. By the way, putting freestanding restaurants in the Sun Belt in front of power centers in the 80s and 90s was a really good idea. It really exploded. And so these are what freestanding restaurants look like now. As Charles mentioned, we've got over 2,000 restaurants now. We're very blessed to be the 7th biggest restaurant company in America. It's actually the largest privately held, family-owned and operated restaurant business in the United States. Still closed on Sunday. Still a business based on biblical principles. Still a business that has the corporate purpose to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and to have a positive influence who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. So it's not like 10 billion sold, it's actually about how do we glorify God. So this is a pretty different business model from a lot of businesses, but it's worked out pretty well. So what's the problem? What's the challenge? Well, the business exploded when we started opening these freestanding stores across the Sun Belt in front of power centers, and we realized the big dilemma. And here's what it is. And I think you actually have this same challenge. You have this same dilemma. Here's what it is. You can only grow your business, your ministry, your not-for-profit based on the capacity of leaders that you attract and develop. I'm going to say that again. Your business, your organization, your not-for-profit, your ministry can only grow based on the capacity that you have to attract and develop leaders. And so that was our big challenge. And so we actually put a team together and said, what are you going to do about this issue? And we started with, what do we want the model of leadership to look like? How do we attract those that represent that and develop those that we bring in to Chick-fil-A? So that's the case study. That's the challenge. What did we do? Well, we put this team together. We said, go study the best. So we went to GE, Tatiana, where's Tatiana? We went to Pepsi and studied Roger Enrico's plan. We went to the Army, we went to churches, met with experts, Kouzes and Posner and Warren Bennis and others. We looked at the Army and they have heroes. This is really important. They have heroes in the Army. Joshua Chamberlain, if you don't know that story, who knows the Joshua Chamberlain story? Civil War, right? Battle of Gettysburg. Basically turned the battle with his bravery and courage. Little Round Top. Hadn't read the story, it's fabulous. Sergeant York, World War I, incredible courage and bravery. These are heroes in the Army. Why does this matter? Because they represent what leadership is in the Army. We needed to find our own heroes at Chick-fil-A. Question for you is, who are your heroes in your organization? Now, I'm not talking about, well, the saints of the church are the heroes, obviously. But what I'm saying is, for your actual organization, who do you actually look at as heroes in your organization? And then, what are the values? The Army was be, know, do. Be, have those sense of values in you, know what you need to do, and then go make it happen. So at Chick-fil-A, we began this journey to say, what's our leadership model? We started with, who are our heroes? You might as well start with the founder, right? Incredible story. You'll read it in the book, Born in the Depression, basically an absentee dad, dirt poor, worked with his mom in a boarding house, learned hospitality from her, never graduated from college, didn't even go to college, went to the military, opened that little restaurant, the Dwarf Grill that I mentioned, with his brother, and his brother dies in a plane crash. But grew that business to, as I mentioned, have the largest family-owned restaurant business in the United States, all based on core principles he was committed to. Truett said the same thing to us over and over and over again from Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and he lived it out. So he was a hero for us, not because he was the founder, because he represented the best of Chick-fil-A. And then another hero for us is Adobe. Our friends in California that are here, she owns the restaurant on where the Rose Bowl is in Pasadena, Colorado Boulevard, right? She owns the store on Colorado Boulevard. Cool story, moved from Nigeria with her family at 13 years old, began working for Chick-fil-A as a part-time team member, as a college athlete. She's the first person in her family to go to college, worked for Chick-fil-A, opening restaurants all across the country, and now she's a Chick-fil-A operator, one of the busiest Chick-fil-A restaurants in America. Adobe's a hero. So this is important. Like, who are your heroes in your organization? So as we look at these heroes, what we know is that most of what matters is below the waterline. If you look at this picture, it's the character. What you see in a person's leadership is skills. How much of the iceberg is under the waterline? Guys, how much? Yeah, basically 90%. So 90% of the leader and their impact is based on their character. It's only 10% that are skills. Now, during the course of the conference, you're going to talk a lot about character. Our session's to talk about skills, so where do you go from there? Well, at Chick-fil-A, we studied, again, all these models of leadership. We looked at our own heroes, and we said, you know what? There's 5 practices that we believe great leaders need to put into practice, 5 skills. I'll share these with you, and then we'll talk about these during our Q&A at more depth as you want to get into each one. So the 5 practices of a leader that we identified at Chick-fil-A, here's number 1, is to see and shape the future. To see and shape the future. Leadership starts with vision. Responding to that call. Leadership starts with vision. It is moving the team, the business, the ministry from here to there, but you got to know where there is that you want to go. We get motivated by vision all the time. Dr. King, I have a dream. Powerful vision. So one of the starting points to think about your development as a leader is, what's your vision? What's your vision for your organization? Second skill, engage and develop others. Engage and develop others. You may have a passion, a vision, a destination, but you've got to engage and develop others. In fact, one way to think about how connected number 1 and 2 are, the fuel of leadership is shared vision. The fuel of leadership is shared vision. Clarity around direction and engagement from the entire team to make it happen. You can't get that engagement without listening, without input, as Charles said earlier. So what do you engage? You engage the head, the heart, and the hands. You engage the head, the heart, and the hands. You engage the head. Why are we doing this? Why does this matter? the heart. What's important to you? Because if it doesn't match that person's goals, their passions, then it'll be hard to create that energy. And then hands, what do we need to do together? Now, one other thing about engaging, developing others is you want to make sure to have the right people for the right job. You need to have the right people for the right job. And let me just stop here for a minute and highlight, especially in ministry work, especially in closely held businesses, this highlights one of those challenges we started with is I thought we were friends. Here's the biggest leadership challenge in a growing ministry, closely held business, family business, anything of that type. It's when the ministry, the business, has outgrown that loyal employee or volunteer. You with me on this one? When that role is constraining because that person is not growing with the ministry or the business, when that person's limitations are hurting the ministry or the business, that's one of the toughest decisions you have to make because that person's loyalty is exactly what you want. But you can't let that person's constraint limit the impact on so many others. Everybody with me on this? Now, don't misconstrue this. This is not like saying, are you saying don't go for the one? That's different from what I'm talking about here in terms of impact. That's still that personal engagement and impact on them spiritually. All right, third skill, reinvent continuously. Reinvent continuously. So you've got a vision, see and shape the future. You're engaging and developing others, but it's not static. You actually have to be in a process of continuous learning and growth. And what do you reinvent? Three things. Yourself, you've got to grow as a leader. You want your team to have this same sense of personal growth. I'll talk about how to in just a couple of minutes. Systems, you want to grow systems, you want to reinvent them. And then you have to reinvent structure. You have to reinvent structure. I'll tell you a fascinating story. This is from an evangelical example, not an Orthodox example. But has anybody ever heard of a pastor in Atlanta named Andy Stanley? Who's heard of Andy Stanley? Okay, a couple of you heard of Andy Stanley. His dad is a famous pastor, Charles Stanley. Andy started a new church called North Point. When Andy began North Point Ministries with his group of leaders, they created an organizational chart for when the church would be 10,000 members, when they actually had about 6 people sitting around the table. And here's what they did. They created a structure for what would you have when a church had 10,000 members, but they put their names in all those boxes. You with me on this? And then as they grew, they began to say, which is the next box that we take our names out of and bring somebody in? Fascinating idea about how do you reinvent continuously by thinking about the future, but creating a structure that matches today, but marches toward the future. So it's a great leadership technique. Fourth, this is super important. If you want to be a leader that has impact, you got to value results and relationships. And this gets into the challenges. So often in our culture, there's so much value on results that we take relationships for granted. And in some cases, the opposite's true too. Hey, it's the church. We don't really need to achieve results or have impact. That's not good stewardship. So it's about the and of results and relationships. Here's one way to think about it. For our engineers in the room, a 2x2 matrix, or those that are consultants, you've got results on one axis, low and high. You got relationships on another axis, low and high. Here's the deal. For you as a leader, you want to make sure that you have a focus on results and relationship at the highest level, off the chart. Because what happens if you have a high focus on results and no focus on relationship? What's it like to be part of that business or ministry? What's it like? Help me out here, guys. You're a number only. It's all about the numbers. It's not about people. What about high relationships, low results? Dysfunction. Yeah, right? We're just going to swim together or play tennis together. We're not really having an impact. So high results and high relationship is a tremendously important practice as a leader. And then number 5, embody the values. Embody the values. You actually have to live them out. You have to know your values, you've got to share those values, and then you want to live them out. Now, what does that look like? Let me tell you a little bit about Chick-fil-A's values. This is what we call our core values, these 4. We talk on our team of these 4 things. We're here to serve. We're better together. It's collaboration. We're purpose-driven, and we pursue what's next. So you can see what we've said matters to us is service to others, hospitality, collaboration, better together, purpose-driven. You heard me mention our corporate purpose earlier. It's about purpose, and then pursuing what's next. It's about innovation. So my question is, what are IOCC's values? Do we know? If it's not clear, it's an encouragement. What are the Exxon values? Are we living up to them? I mean, think about your own business. Brandon, what are your business's values? Are we living up to them? Do we know what they are? Can we share them? This is vitally important. And here's an interesting thing to think about. I'm going to tell you a story about how this happened, and it's really fascinating. So I mentioned this team that we put together to identify this leadership model for Chick-fil-A. And we did all this study, again, from GE to Pepsi to Army to churches to the Navy SEALs. And we came up with this list of 5 practices. You've just seen them, right? We had these practices, we were changing the words, and I'm telling you the honest truth, I'm in the room. One of the gentlemen on the team walks to the board, he says, I can't believe this. He took these 5 different practices that were not in the order that I just shared with you. They were in a different order, they were in a random order. And he said, look, this is true. He said, look at the first 5 practices, first word in each one. He said, the first one, if we put it in this order, starts with S. The second one is E. The third one is R. The fourth one is V. And you already know what's coming up next, right? I was in the room, true story. We didn't try to create a model that fit SERVE. It was the fruit of the research we did, and it actually happened in the room. Fascinating. So it became the core of what we believe is leadership at Chick-fil-A. It's about serving others. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate model of servant leadership. That's why there's a statue at Chick-fil-A of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. So we've summarized this in a book. If you want to get this is on Amazon. It's written by Ken Blanchard, famous business author, and a gentleman who works with us, Mark Miller. Mark's one of our vice presidents and actually works on leadership development at Chick-fil-A. This is an easy book. It's a fable that's got the serve principles in it. And I think you then transition to this question, how do I grow as a leader? So if I want to be that kind of leader with those kind of skills, what do I have to do? And here's the deal. It starts with personal growth. You can't let your leadership role outgrow you. So you got to grow. 4 areas, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and physically. Reflects Luke 2:52. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. If you break that apart, you see he grew in wisdom, intellectual, stature, physical, favor with God, spiritual, and man, emotional. That is the Theosophilus translation of those 4. So this is a vitally important thing about personal growth. If you've not read this book, read this book. This book is called Mindset. It's written by Stanford psychology professor Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck's research is fascinating because she says fundamentally we lean towards either having what she calls a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Now here's the quick difference. I'll tell you the essence, still buy the book, it's worth it. Fixed mindset is simply this. A fixed mindset is, I can't learn or I don't need to learn. Anybody got teenagers? Just saying. But often they're plagued with a fixed mindset. I don't need this, or I can't do that. A growth mindset says, I can learn, and even through failure. Because I might fail, but if I reflect and apply, I can grow from it. And a growth mindset fuels personal growth. And she has great data that support this idea of how powerful a growth mindset is. All right, so how do you do it? Here's some takeaways, some to-dos. If you want to grow as a leader on top of your personal growth, starts with targeted improvement. Which of those challenges do you want to respond to? Which of those practices do you want to build on? Targeted improvement. Mike Hyatt's going to be with you tomorrow. He'll talk about the power of written goals. Written goals. All the research is clear. When you write a goal down about growth, the likelihood of that happening goes up dramatically. Third, stretch. Stretch yourselves and others. In fact, I love what Charles said earlier. Here's the principle we use at Chick-fil-A. The number one way to grow another leader is to give them real responsibility. The number one way to grow another leader is give them real responsibility. And then lastly, you got to have truth tellers in your life. So you want to seek feedback and accountability. You got to have truth tellers. So I'm going to tell you, when we get done, sometime next week, I'm going to call Dimitri Katos on the phone, and I'm going to say, Dimitri, give me feedback on this presentation. Because Dimitri's going to tell me, because we're truth tellers for each other. Right? Amen, brother. So you want to increase your leadership impact? What's the dismount on this? All of us have these 4 spheres of influence that you can impact as a leader. Your personal sphere of influence, people that you just connect with on a daily basis. Your family, your professional, your career, and then your community. Understanding your spheres of influence is vitally important as a leader to have impact. Here's why. If you misunderstand this, you really get in trouble. So here's the deal. So I'm with you guys this weekend. I hope I'm going to give you guys something that you're going to take away that'll be helpful. But if I've actually not invested in Luke and Nicholas, our 2 college-age students, as leaders, then I've gotten my spheres of influence out of whack. You with me on this one? If I focus so much on that professional sphere of influence and I really don't impact my family in a powerful way, I'm out of bounds. I'm out of balance. And especially if I don't work on my own personal spirituality first, then I'm really going to limit my impact in my family, my career, and my community. It's a vital, important step in this personal stewardship. So here's the final thought, and then we'll do Q&A. When I talk about dare to lead, here's what I mean. Dare to lead's got 2 pieces to it. Dare to lead means, how am I going to grow as a leader? I want to dare to lead. I want to step out. God called us to lead and impact. I want to dare to lead, but I also want to dare others to lead. And so I'm encouraging you guys. I mean, part of what we're doing here is we're challenging and encouraging each other to have an impact, but I think this is the most important thing to remember. Don't get caught by the world's premise that the most important thing is being a transformational leader, because what comes first is to be transformed as a leader. And if we get this out of whack, then we won't be fulfilling God's calling, I think, the way He wants us to as a steward, as a servant, and as a leader. So begin by focusing on being transformed versus being transformational. All right, let's do Q&A. We've got about 20 minutes or so. And so comments, disagreements, suggestions, and questions. Yes?
Just a question on the business model of Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Being a fixed cost business like that is, and the day of Sunday being closed, does it reduce return on capital because of that? It's just not.
So that's a great question. So here's, and as I say this, yeah, let me repeat the question. The question is, with being closed on Sunday and being such a heavy fixed asset business, return on capital, how does it impact Chick-fil-A's business, especially does it impact it negatively? Is that a good interpretation? So as I say this, I'm saying this in all humility, and we're very blessed about this, but Chick-fil-A's revenues per store are double everybody else in the quick service restaurant business. And so again, that's 6 days a week, and it's actually opening a little later and closing earlier, restaurant by restaurant, than the competition. And part of the reason we open later and close earlier is because we think we can get better employees to work in a fast food environment if they have better hours. And so for whatever reason, we've been very blessed to have that great outcome. If you used to ask Mr. Cathy before he passed away about the decision to close on Sunday, here's what he would say. He said, the best business decision I've ever made to close on Sunday was not made for business reasons, but it's been the best business decision he ever made. Does that track? Yeah. So Dan Cathy Truitt's son, who's now our chairman and CEO, he's my boss, he has an expression about Chick-fil-A being closed on Sunday. It's pretty cool. He said he thinks our light shines the most when our lights are off. Does that make sense? So I would say this, Mr. Cathy, Truett Cathy, he never told anybody else they ought to close on Sunday, you should be closed on Sunday. He felt like that's what God called him to do, because he used to go eat at Wendy's on Sundays. And it wasn't like he said, hey, it's just he felt like it was best for his business. He did used to order like a Wendy's hamburger and like order everything on the burger really slowly, kind of back up the drive-through line. Just kidding. Just kidding. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think we're going to use the mics.
Thank you. So my question is about a Christian-centric business, and that being how is that, you can perceived externally how it could be perceived, but how is it perceived internally for your employees?
Yep.
Has there ever been any, I'm sure you have nuns
Sure.
that work for you,
Yep.
that developed this presentation, did did some things for you. What
Yeah.
impact is it having on them?
Great question. So first and foremost, and again, it started with Mr. Cathy, he said very clearly, he said, Chick-fil-A is not a Christian company. A company can't be a Christian. Only a person can. He said this is a business based on biblical principles, golden rule, stewardship. He said, actually, I'd recommend biblical principles to any business because it actually just makes good common sense to operate your business that way. But this is not a Christian company. And so it's a vitally important understanding. So I mentioned our corporate purpose earlier, to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and have a positive influence to all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. That's not in any restaurants. It's not on the wall. It's on a plaque in front of our support center because that is where the Cathy's family's business is hosted, but it's not facing the customer. And that was Mr. Cathy himself that said, I don't want this up in the stores. This is about what we believe and how we're going to run the business, not trying to promote anything to the community. So arguably, anybody that comes to work at Chick-fil-A, they clearly know it's a business based on those core principles, those biblical principles, but we don't ask anybody about their faith before they come and work at Chick-fil-A. So we don't have any idea what their faith is. But likely, they're not uncomfortable that the Cathy family believes so strongly what they believe about their faith. Yeah, Brandon.
One of the things I'm continually amazed by is that your values are carried out by teenagers. And a lot of times I'm sitting in the drive-thru
Those
line.
heathen teenagers. Yeah.
And so, a lot of times we're sitting in the drive-thru line at another place and we think, oh, they need to get Chick-fil-A over here and show them how to get people through the drive-thru a lot faster. How do you carry out your values to the lowest levels of your organization?
So, great question, Brandon. Here's the deal. And it's going to take me 1 second to set the frame for the answer. Our Chick-fil-A restaurants are 100% independently owned and operated by independent franchisees, independent owner-operators. That is not company controlled at all. And so the significance is if you get that kind of consistency, what it's a reflection of is commitment over compliance. It's a reflection of selecting an owner that's committed to those kinds of principles of service and development, a lot of what we talked about here, but they make that choice to become part of Chick-fil-A. They live that out in the restaurant and they train their team. It's not okay, you do it or you're out thing at Chick-fil-A. It's about commitment versus compliance. So when somebody tells me, I get on an airplane and they know I work for Chick-fil-A and they say, how do you do this with all these teenagers and how am I waffle fry outside all the time and all that? You must have an incredible corporate training program. And of course, I don't laugh to them, but inside I laugh because like if you only knew that this is all independent operators who basically are choosing to do business in a certain way. And so it's a commitment-based model.
How do you?
So 80% of culture in any organization starts with selection. And so this model of what do you want a leader to look like, if you don't know what you're recruiting, then your culture is going to be just as disparate. But if you're really clear, what I want the culture to be in my business or my ministry, and I recruit to it, 80% is who you recruit, and then don't stamp it out of them when they get there. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from your perspective what you see as one or two of the largest sort of prevailing misconceptions about leadership.
Oh, no question. Number one, without fail, is the misconception that leadership is a position, that it's title, that it's authority, that it's resources. That is not leadership. That is position, authority, resources. Leadership is intentional influence. So like you can be at a parish council meeting and you can look in the room and there can be a president of the parish council and there can be a priest, but that doesn't mean that's the leader in the room, right? All you do is got to watch the eyes, watch the behavior. There's no question in that parish council meeting who's leading and who's not, who's taking initiative, who's providing positive environment, who's providing encouragement. Now, there may be somebody in there that's really powerful that everybody's complying to because of one of those other things, but that's not leadership. And unfortunately, okay, so here we go. Unfortunately, it's just as true in the church as it is in the corporate environment. That we think power, position, authority is leadership. It's absolutely not. Leadership, fundamentally, is about that intentional influence. And I think God calls us to lead that way wherever we are. And if you don't lead with the heart of the servant, then you're going to get caught in that trap. So I'm sorry, I saw Dean first and then over here. So
Dean with IOCC. I joined IOCC whatever years ago. According to Charles, I'm 100 years old since I'm more than 3 years in my job. Because I wanted to see as far as the church could be run like a business, and it's out of respect, right? The church, just because we have black robes and beards doesn't mean we can't run as efficiently as the businesses. And I think the challenge that we face now, and I'd be curious as far as your thoughts, is as much as the model is based on the Christian values, right, and being of the church, how do we bring all this back to our church when we're facing such challenges that we face today?
So my perspective on that is that the principles of servant leadership, the principles that we're talking about today, do apply to both the church and a business. And for me, it's like Christ's model for leadership is over all that. And how to do that, I think part of it is what we're doing here, which is to open up the discussion, to learn and grow, and to be willing to learn from people that are in for-profit, not-for-profit, and the church from each other. Because one of my favorite authors, Henry Cloud, anybody ever read Henry Cloud stuff? He's fabulous. Henry says leaders need to have opinions and be open. That if you don't bring an opinion, if you don't have a point of view, you're really not contributing as a leader. But if you're not open, you're going to limit your leadership effectiveness. I think in the dialogue between church, not-for-profit, and for-profit, we need to have perspectives, but we need to be open to each other. So, yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
My question is, for those of us who love Chick-fil-A and admire the company's stance on closing on Sundays, how did you handle the opening of the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta with the Sunday pro games and not being open to the fans?
Yeah. So we went to the Mercedes-Benz Stadium and SunTrust Park in Atlanta, which is our new football stadium and our new baseball stadium. And in both cases, we said, it's simply not even in the discussion. It's not a negotiation because it's non-negotiable. And so we had to say, was it worth it for us from a business standpoint to be in both places? And we're very straight up with the folks at SunTrust and the folks and the Falcons and Mercedes-Benz. You know our stand. Do you want us if we're not open on Sunday? And the Falcons said absolutely yes, and we were thrilled because there's soccer games and other college football games, and we're doing great there. And then the same thing with the baseball stadium, and we're glad we've done it in both. We've actually set records in both locations, so we're thrilled with that. Yes?
Can you talk about your experience overcoming fixed mindsets in business and how to get through that?
So, great question. The question was, how do you overcome fixed mindset in business? I'll tell you our own issue, and I'm part of the problem, is this perfectionism that's in our culture. Because we have this really strong ethic of effort, excellence, success, do things right. So even with this servant mindset, it's like, hey, do it right from the beginning. Well, often that can limit growth because you're not willing to take some risks and fail. And it's like you have to have everything right before you try something. And we're actually working hard to eradicate that in our culture and be willing to take a little more risk, a little more failure. We had one of our leaders who did something for her team to illustrate this. She redid her resume as a resume of failures. And she presented to the leadership team and she said, all right, here's my biggest failures in each one of these jobs and roles that I've had. And then, because don't be confused here, failure as an end goal is not it. It's only fail to learn is the key and then grow. And so she put this resume of failures and then she added, what did I learn from that failure? Which I thought was fabulous. So, yeah.
Hi, Michelle Mujayas from Faith Tree Resources. You mentioned reinventing yourself regularly. So do you have lane lines for that? Are there any kind of boundaries that you would advise?
Yeah. So first of all, this truth teller process where you have people that are truth tellers in your life, it's vitally important that that is an ongoing relationship. It's really hard to have a truth teller in your life that pops in, says, hey, you stink at this, and pops out. It just doesn't work very well. You got to build that relationship. And so having people over time that you have that relationship with is vitally important. They can help you with, now you're really getting out of bounds here. This is too much. You're taking too much on. Or, hey, this is where you've got a blind spot. Literally, it is a true blind spot. I see it, others see it, you don't. And so those truth tellers really help you navigate that. The other thing is, when you're going to grow, you have to prioritize. You have to focus and say, what matters most? And so I know for me in my role, there's a lot of things I need to work on, but the most important thing for me is this idea of creating clarity. Can I communicate well enough to our organization what matters most? Because if I don't do that, you've probably heard this before. It's like if there's fog in the pulpit, there's mist in the pews. Y'all heard that? Yes. Okay. So it's very true in business just as it is in the church.
Take up to 4 or 5 more. We want to leave at 10 after to walk over to the
Got it. John Moore. Did that help? I want to make sure I'm answering the question. Okay.
So I've been in 2 kinds of organizations. I'll call the first kind the Krispy Kreme organization that has an awesome product and overexpands so quickly that they collapse or don't do as well. And then I've been at places that have missed every opportunity that ever came along because they weren't going to hurt the core business. How do you negotiate between kind of revolutionary, we got to keep going and grow, versus, and maybe it's not fair to Krispy Kreme, just rapid expansion that can't be sustained?
Yeah. So the best business summary principle there is was written by a guy named Jim Collins in his book, Built to Last. And it's this idea that in every organization, there's an and, not an or, of preserve the core and stimulate progress. The and, not or, preserve the core and stimulate progress. If you're not sure what your core is, what's our mission, what's our core values, how are we committed to people, what are those boundaries of integrity, and everything about the core of the business, what business are we in? At the same time, stimulate progress. Be willing to change things over and over again, but not change what is the core. If you're not talking about preserve the core and stimulate progress, if you're not talking about that, you're likely to change for change's sake and not preserve the core, or you're going to be so focused on preserving the core, you'll have no progress. This has nothing to do with the church, just saying. But I mean, I'm kidding, of course. The church has to deal with it just like any business does. What is core? You know, core is orthodoxy, not ethnicity, for instance. But what's progress? Is what do we do differently? It's back to Hank, tradition versus traditionalism. That's preserve the core and stimulate progress. And so you have to think about that intentionally about your ministry or your organization. Yeah, John. I'll repeat it.
Tim, came up with the problem of, everyone came up with the problem in their list, it seemed, of time management.
Yeah.
So could you offer us a few things in your own life, how you dealt with that problem?
Yeah. So for me, from a time management standpoint, I would argue that the most important thing for me is daily habits, weekly solo time, and written goals. So let me say those very specifically. Daily habits. For me, what grounds me is my daily routine. So every morning, it's my immediately prayer time, scripture, reading. And I'm so committed to that. I do it 7 days a week, week after week, month after month, and it's just part of a daily discipline. I'm convinced that that grounds the rest of the day. So that's one. Number two is if I've got one tip on planning, it's weekly solo time, where you take 1 hour this week planning next week's most important activities. Because what you want to do is you want to make sure to schedule your most important priorities versus having your schedule prioritized by others' most important priorities. And so solo time weekly is key. I do it every Sunday night, 10 to 11. And then the third is this whole idea of written goals. If you're not thinking about, okay, what matters most spiritually, physically, emotionally, what matters most in my family, what matters most in what I do in the community, if you don't have some sense of where you're trying to go, then I think it's very likely you'll get taken off track from what God's calling you to do. So those are my three keys: daily disciplines, weekly solo time, and written goals. And can I say one thing before we stop? I'm like incredibly grateful to be with you guys today. I really appreciate the opportunity. And as I talk about Chick-fil-A, let me just be abundantly clear. I know all our blind spots, not all our blind spots, but I know a bunch of our imperfections and weaknesses. So when I stand up here, do not hear me standing up of like, we got it figured out, we're the best thing. That's not it. I'm just grateful personally that I stumbled into a Chick-fil-A restaurant 40 years ago and learned some principles in this business that actually combine with what I learned from my folks. And I just feel like I'm trying to be a steward of the gifts given me, not that we got it all figured out and that you should do anything we do. I think my encouragement to all of us is just be good stewards of the gifts given you. If we can all do that, then I think that's the best way to honor God, build the church, and build whatever business or ministry you're in. So that's my call, my encouragement is to continue to be the good steward you are, and I think that's what God's calling us to do.
Tim,
So,
we know
thanks.
what a sacrifice it was for you to do this. I must admit to you, it was Tim who said, Charles, I just became president. I had to retire from the Holy Cross Board. I can't do it. I said, well, Tim, you know, maybe God is leading me not to hold this conference. I'm seeing it.
No pressure, no pressure. No pressure.
And he said, I will instruct my staff to put all my meetings in New York that week. Tim, you have been a great encouragement. I appreciate our friendship, and let's give him a great round of applause.
Thank you, guys.